Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome to San Francisco Camerawork this evening. We're incredibly grateful that you've joined us tonight, and we have an exciting program planned for you ahead. I know there's lots of places that you guys can be on a Tuesday night, so I always appreciate seeing you guys tune in here and to participate in our programming, to hear from artists, and to connect around photography. So welcome, and it's really good to see all of you guys coming in. So you'll notice that we're in webinar mode tonight. So please make use of the chat and the Q&A feature that you see at the bottom of our screen to provide any comments or questions. It's always nice to see how you guys are reacting to the work. And there will be a designated time at the end of tonight for questions for Sanaz and for Shirin. But please feel free to ask questions throughout the evening, and we'll also try to answer them appropriately. And now is your time to ask any questions of Sanaz while she's here. So don't be shy to ask your questions. And so with that, I'll start us off tonight with a land acknowledgement, and then I'll introduce tonight's program. So we're called San Francisco Camerawork, and what is now called San Francisco is on the stolen land of the Ohlone and Ramaytush people, to whom we owe a collective debt. We'd like to recognize the original inhabitants of this land that many of us call home, and thank the indigenous peoples of the Bay Area for stewarding this land throughout the generations. We've all benefited from being settlers on this land, and I am incredibly grateful. So if you're interested in learning more about the land where you live, you can look it up in a link that I'll drop into the chat in just a moment. And Sanaz is joining us tonight from Toronto, and I'll introduce both Sanaz and Shirin in a moment, but I'll hand the floor over here briefly for Sanaz to give her own land acknowledgement.
Thank you so much, Christina, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here and inviting me to this talk, and I'm really excited to share my work with you in a few moments. I would like to begin by noting my gratitude to be living and working on this land, also as an uninvited guest. Today, Toronto is the home to many indigenous people and is the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm thankful for the thousands of years of stewardship of this land, which has allows me to be here today. And in particular, I am here from a faraway land. My native land is where I left due to a deep and systemic force of colonialism, which mined my country's resources and destabilized our region for oil and power. So these forces resulted in a long 8-year war between Iran and its neighbor, and forced my family and I to immigrate here from the country of my birth in December 1988. And I wanted to also state that I stand in solidarity with Indigenous people and the collective struggle for justice. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sanaz. So tonight's program is a part of the San Francisco Fast Forward series, and this is the second event in that series. And the idea behind it is to create these special visits where we kind of check in and have conversations with artists who've previously exhibited at SF Camerawork and give us the opportunity to both reflect on those exhibitions and also learn a little bit more about how that work has shifted and taken shape since then. So tonight it's with so much excitement that I get to welcome Sanaz Mazinani back into the SF Camerawork space. And her work was beautifully exhibited at SF Camerawork in a solo exhibition called Signal to Noise in 2017. And I'll drop a link to that exhibition into the chat as well, so you guys can check it out. And so tonight we'll hear a little bit about that exhibition and also recent work. from both Light Times and Rolling Reflections. And after that presentation, Sanaz will be joined in conversation with SF Camerawork Programming Committee member Shirin Makaremi. And then we'll also open everything up for some questions. So I'm going to introduce Shirin, who will then introduce Sanaz, and then we'll kick off tonight's presentation. So Shirin is an Iranian American artist and curator based in San Francisco, and she is the co-director at Incline Gallery in the Mission. In 2018, Shirin was a part of a curatorial collective in residence at Soma Arts Cultural Center. She received her BA from San Francisco State University in studio art and art history. So thank you so much, Shirin, for being here tonight. And I'll hand it over to you. Thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight, and I hope you enjoy tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Christina. I am very excited to be here and excited for Sanaz to be here and sharing her work with us. So Sanaz Mazinani is an artist, educator, and curator based in Toronto, working across the disciplines of photography, sculpture, and large-scale multimedia installations. Mazinani creates informational objects that invite a rethinking of how we see, suspending the viewer between observation and knowledge. Informed by the visual rhetoric and confounding presence of contemporary media circulation, her multidisciplinary practice aims to politicize the proliferation and the distribution of images and introduce critical reflection. She holds an undergraduate degree from Ontario College of Art and Design and an MFA from Stanford University. Her work has appeared in solo exhibitions at institutions including the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, the West Vancouver Museum, and the Triton Museum of Art in Santa Clara, California. Her projects have been featured in venues throughout Canada, as well as USA, France, Germany, Guatemala, India, Iran, Switzerland, the UAE, and the UK. Mazinani's work has been written about in Artforum, ArtNet News, Border Crossings, Canadian Art, San Francisco Chronicle, Washington Post, among others. She has received grants from the Zellerbach Family Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and her work is held in public collections, including the Canada Council Art Bank, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the San Francisco International Airport. And I'm so excited to have you here with us. So I'll hand it over to you, Sanaz, and have you take over.
Oh, wonderful. And I'm looking forward to our conversation and the continued conversation with everyone attending tonight. Thanks for being here. So I just wanted to let you know, I'm going to start by speaking about a bunch of different projects, but really the core of it is going to be a basic overview of the exhibition that I had at SF Camerawork and just kind of reflection on it. And then a couple of new projects that I've done since, and speak a little bit about where my kind of new areas of research or interest are kind of going towards. So with that, I'm gonna start sharing my screen and let's see if this works. Okay, I gotta remember to do this right. Okay, do we have the right screen?
It's not on the full presentation, maybe.
It's not? Oh, okay, so you saw my notes. That's what I was afraid of.
Yeah.
All right, let me move this again.
It's all good. I think everyone after this year has experienced all kinds of back and forth trying to figure out presentations. So
I know.
You're definitely not alone.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about this. I'm just gonna have to do it in reverse order and hope for the best this time.
No worries at all.
Okay. Let's try this. Does this work?
No, it's back to the same.
Oh, I see. How about now? No.
Yeah.
How come it worked just like minutes ago when we tested it?
No worries.
Oh, I know what's going on.
It's all
All
good.
right.
While you figure this out, I'll take a time to just let everyone know to, Christina mentioned, feel free to, post your questions in the chat, or Zoom has a Q&A section as well. Feel free to, go ahead and throughout the presentation, and we'll figure it out as we go. Normally we can do the questions towards the end, so then there's more of a conversation. But there's no strict rules around here, so we can also do it throughout the presentation. Sanaz, it looks like it's working now. There's just a gray bar. I don't know if that's just like a window you need to, yep, I think you have it.
Oh, you still see that? Huh,
It's just blocked out, but now it works. So
okay, that was the Zoom window over top.
Oh,
Okay, so I'm sorry, everyone. Thank you for your kind patience. So yes, this is one of my favorite images of my work of all time that I wanted to start with, and of course it's at SF Camerawork. You guys might recognize those big windows. It was just so exciting to be able to do something that was site specific. So SF Camerawork was incredibly supportive of me. Everyone together as a team worked really hard to secure some funding. So we wrote some grants and got some funding, and so I could purchase these kind of luxurious materials like see-through gels for the windows. And of course, the exhibition was kind of conceived and planned during the year of 2016, which was the year of the election year that we probably all remember and still have trauma related to it. So the exhibition concept was a lot for me about ideas of post-truth politics and how hold on, I'll come back to that, and how that changes the way that we experience the world. So the windows that I designed were actually based on the color palette RGB, and so they kind of stood in for television or televised kind of information for me. And the color of the walls was based on the color palette of photography. So I use CMY for CMYK, but in particular in terms of darkroom photography in color. And of course here you can see Christina. I wanted to include this sweet picture because here is Christina holding my 4-month-old as I was installing the show. So this is a mid-installation shot, and I had amazing support again on that front to be able to do my work while I was also caring for my child. So we had a lot of cuddles in between install moments. So here is the 3 colors that I was talking about. So I was really interested in kind of presenting my work in terms of it's kind of like the language of photography and the elements of photography. And then in addition to kind of the installation, which also included a sound work, there were individual works. And so this was one of the pieces on the magenta wall. And this was from an earlier series titled Frames of the Visible. And I think maybe some people are familiar with this work, but I made this work coming out of my graduate kind of thesis work, and I was really interested in, at the time, the proliferation of images, but the circulation of them through Facebook. So we're talking kind of early, like 2009 and 2010 is what I was kind of making this work and thinking about this work. And so this is all before like machine learning really hit contemporary culture. And so the work was really about how one would post an image and how a single image could get repeated so many times and hence become a kind of an embedded part of our understanding of the world. And then my question was, what are the images that are being circulated and what are the images that are being redacted and not shared? And so as several pieces from this project were taken out of a sequence of images that were released through the Freedom of Information Act. And these were images of American soldiers coming back home in coffins. And they were part of this series of images that were being taken by staff photographers of the Department of Defense, but not being released due to prior legislation that was put into place by uh, different eras of the government, but getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And so when the images were released through the Freedom of Information Act of the Iraq and wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, large portions of them were redacted. So you can see perhaps here the figure of a man, and then his face and his name is redacted, and then so is the next person. And so the white dots are the black spots on the photograph, which I reversed. That is an aesthetic kind of decision. And so I was really looking at these images regularly and wondering, what does it mean if just a young person, for example, would search the word Iraq? What are the images that would come up? What were the images that would come up if a person searched the name of the country that I was born in? And how would that inform the reality of life? So really interested in like the perspectives of what gets circulated. And simultaneous to this, this is an old infographic, but I wanted to share it because this is the moment that I was looking at this information. It shows the number of images on Facebook in 2011 compared to the number of images in the Library of Congress. So we're really thinking about what is being consumed was very interesting to me at the time. And again, some other statistics about the number of photographs being taken. So we're thinking about when we only had film cameras, what were the number of images that were being taken? And I was really interested in thinking about how one would choose to take a photograph and what one would select versus today when we all have multiple devices that can register images. So again, this is a kind of an artwork by a fellow artist, and looking at different networks of image sharing. And so, for example, my Facebook feed, because I have lots of friends from Iran, will look quite different than, let's say, another person who I live with in the same city and I'm friends with, should they not have that same kind of connection. And where are these images being kind of fed through? And so I don't know if you can you see my arrow? So I was just thinking about these. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can see the arrow. It's
so
just small.
Yeah, so just these points, these nodes of kind of information sharing and how an image can circulate over and over again. So again, this is another piece from the same series. This time I actually did, it's a different image, but I also didn't reverse the image file. And I actually also made work. So this Frames of the Visible ended for me in 2016 with this final piece that I made. And this piece was, I guess, about Trump, but in particular about the circulation of his image and his kind of presence worldwide. So this is, down below is an image of him in the during the third presidential debate, and the numerous cameras and photographers and lights. And then this is an image of him from an earlier speech in an equivalent to like I guess a Best Buy, but in Japan. So I was really interested in the kind of the extent of his reach. And when I was making this work, we were not sure that he was going to win that election. So at that point, it was just kind of evaluating how photography and media can have an effect on politics. And so the work also included this earlier project where I use images of a drone, and then this layered and underneath, I don't think I have a detail, but in the back, these kind of 12 pointed stars is actually picture of a lone soldier on a desert landscape. You would be able to see it in person. Sorry, I don't have a close-up. And so finally, this was a sculptural piece that I was very excited about making, and I made this work with my brother. So we collaborated. We've been collaborating for a number of years, but this was a really exciting one. And the work was, again, a response to the post-truth that was going on and the kind of issues around bias and filtering of information, issues around the way information can be tinted or tainted. And so we wanted to use these acrylic panels to speak to that. And there's my brother and Christina helping attach it all. And of course, my very good friend Shar, who has been an exceptional help to me throughout the years. So the work was quite beautiful, depending on the point of view that you would stand in. But simultaneously, it would change the experience of the world. So it would filter it somehow. And when you stood right in front of it, and it would be black, so you could no longer see it. So once the layers of filtration were placed over top of each other, and what you saw was either your own reflection on one side or the other side, a black darkness. So that was where I'm going to leave it at for this project, for this installation. But I think for me, it was a really kind of meaningful moment in time to be able to reflect about what was going on with our politics. So the next project that I'd like to talk about is another work that isn't a gallery work, and this was an installation at the Stephen Bulger Gallery, which is a really wonderful, amazing gallery here in Toronto. And the installation was all about photography, which is why I'm really excited to share it with this audience. So I designed the installation so that upon entry into the room, once you entered in, you would see the work pretty much in a black and white scale. And then once you reached the back where the curtain is and turned around, you could see all the works, like alternative side, and you could see the work was in color. So that was just a little tongue-in-cheek about photography, but really about sight. So again, I think I continued the idea around post-truth politics, but in this case, I really wanted to kind of almost even take out the very kind of charged image of, let's say, a child who looks displaced, and actually just drop in something very abstract to speak about how photography has the power to change and shift reality. So really, in a way, it's a critique on politics, this installation. So the show started by when you entered, there was actually a soundtrack, again, a collaboration with my brother and I. And the soundtrack had a lot to do with scales of distance and relationships. So it started with kind of sounds of the atmosphere, in particular thunder, to the sounds of the kind of upper atmosphere, and then into the transformation of solar flares into audible sound. And so, of course, there's a lot going on, more than that. But so we made a record, and so we were playing the record. And then next to it was actually a diffuser with scent that I created, titled Illume, with my collaborator. And Ayala Morel, who is based out of Israel. And so we made this scent called Illume, and it was actually the scent of photography, as I imagined what photography, the art of photography would be if it was transformed into a scent. And so there were some elements of it that we kind of played with, which was, we played with the concept of nostalgia. So this feeling of something being very clear upon the moment where the photograph is taken, but with time, there's a fading of the memory and a fading of the photograph and the fading of the scent. And also there were little nods, although it's a very enjoyable scent, I should say, there was a kind of a slight tinge of darkroom scent to it. So we use all natural materials, but Ayala was able to find a specific mushroom that she could incorporate into the palette that really smelled a little bit like the darkroom. The black and white darkroom. So there we have it. So and so you would kind of enter the space and listen to the record and the sound and smell the scent. And then the first series, these were the images that inspired the entire installation. And I know it's really bad. I'm a photographer, and these are camera-less, lens, like no lens, no camera, no film photography. So what they are is I made this work in 2003, and as a student, as a young student who was very interested in defining what photography was at the time. If you can imagine, in 2003, that's when the kind of potentially good digital cameras came onto the market. So it was like a huge question for me as a student, wondering what is a photograph and how abstract can you be, and kind of comparing it a lot to abstract expressionism and the work of Jackson Pollock and how he transformed the painting. So what I did was just went in the darkroom, all lights are off because color darkroom, and just exposed, dialed in some gels and colors, and exposed my paper. And so these onto photographic paper. So that's the part. There is a photons being registered at some point. So then from there, each work was made using only these 5 prints, photographic prints. So you might be able to tell by the color palette which this one is, which is this one. And so here I basically, this one's like a ode to Photoshop, and then it's called Fold. And so what I did here was just kind of use some basic Photoshop tools, but only the tools that speak to the history of the darkroom. So anything that was kind of like burning and dodging and such, the kind of language. From there, here, this is a detail. And also I've kind of entered in a little bit of pixelization so that it was clear what was kind of happening. And then the piece to the left is the same photographic print, but just held in light in such a way that you could see the thinness of the paper, the kind of the undulation of the paper. And then from there, this image is duplicated to make this work. And this was quite a process for me. Again, I have to thank my collaborators with this project, who helped me figure out how to form aluminum that had an image on it. It was not easy. I'm not sure that I would make this work again. It was really very difficult. But so we did transfer the image and then roll it, and I was really interested to see what happens to a straight line when your surface is rolled. And again, more collaborators, so I should specifically talk about that right now. I was really interested in thinking about how each individual can affect a source or the content of an image or the formation of an image. And so my collaborators and I, for this installation, whose names I made sure to put at the entry and make sure everyone knew about their work. This on the left is Bob Carney, who made this amazing gum by chromate print. And then on the right is Jacob Horwood with Private Press Printing, who made this piece that uses silkscreen technique. And so I made sure that each person had artistic license. So it was really, really important for me that their understanding of the work or their interest could shape and change the piece as well. So here are just two details of the work. So the silk screening process, and then on the right, the tried gum print was really important for me to include in the exhibition because I wanted to talk about the history of photography and how we first began to see color images. And this is the original, by the way. So just as a reference point as to how it transformed. So in this case, on the left, Bob Carney actually flipped it. So it was no longer even the same orientation. And then there's this same source used as a sculpture. And here's the two of them together. On the right is the original, on the left is the sculpture. This is another piece that I think uses the lightest one, the beige one, and it's basically the negative of the work on top of the positive of the work. So I had a lot of fun doing, transfers and making large film negatives with this and all of that. I also worked with another amazing local artist to make these tintypes. The tintype, it was, I think, photographed, yeah, I'm just trying to remember this, after the pieces were framed. So what we did was we just actually played with the depth of field of the focus with the work here. And I hope it's present, but on the right, you'll be able to see the camera is what's been focused on. So I couldn't have an exhibition about the photography without including a daguerreotype. So I was very lucky to work with Mike Robinson, who is a very well-known historian on daguerreotypes. He is one of very few people in the whole world who is still making daguerreotypes using traditional process. And he let me into the studio and we were able to collaborate together to make this daguerreotype. And so we did everything from the vapors and the gold toning. It was just an incredible experience. So that was one of the pieces on the right as a daguerreotype. And on the left is simply one of the works but cropped to the proportions of a 35mm film. And again, that's like an ode. This piece for me was an ode to 35mm film, because in the end I am a bit of a photography geek. And there's the guard close. I also included a sculpture. For me, I mean, I think we'll talk about this more later, but I often think of the mirror as a stand-in for the camera because it has this ability to represent us and show us ourselves in an immediate way. So this included a sculpture.
Sanaz, I just have to say, like, how I love this exhibition, and I didn't see it in person, but having talked to you about it and seeing all the images again now and having you talk more in depth about each piece, it's so playful and fun. I can just imagine how much fun you were having, kind of pushing the limits of photography and seeing how else photography can be experienced. I thought
Yeah,
cool.
exactly. And also just like for me, it was so important to think about how each perspective can shape the experience of it too.
Yeah, it feels limitless in so many ways. So it's fun to see. I can imagine people who are able to see the show just spending time in there, and like every piece being another window into photography.
Thank you. That's really great to hear. Yeah, I really did enjoy making this show, and I spent a lot of time in there. Uh, so one of the pieces that actually does what you're describing, Shirin, is this lenticular work. And so this is the same piece from three different points of view. So basically, I used three images interlaid within one another. And so as you walk, the colors change. And for me, this piece was simultaneously extremely political because what it was is that it started off with a single color work, and I played with hue and saturation in Photoshop until the moment that I could get all of this variation. And so again, it was something that uh, was manipulated, extremely so by myself. And so I think that had a lot to do with it, the manipulated image. Yeah. Okay, so sorry, I didn't remember that was the last slide. I want to move on to one more project, and then we can do a conversation. Does that sound good? All right, so this is a project that I'm very proud of that was installed in San Francisco recently, and it is a public artwork outdoors, so you can go and experience it. And you were able to also during most of the year because of it being outdoors. So this project was commissioned by the city of San Francisco, and particularly the San Francisco Arts Commission, for a building at 49 South Van Ness. So it's just basically at the intersection of Van Ness and Mission. And the project includes 20 sculptures, and each sculpture has its own shape and form and color, but what unites them all is the fact that one side of each sculpture is mirror and the other side is kind of this organic form. And the inspiration for this project was actually the city of San Francisco itself. And I should mention the site is the Planning and Public Works Commission building in San Francisco. So I wanted it to be about San Francisco. What this is this it unites these two kind of elements, the organic and this kind of like linear. And for me, the linear stands in for the built environment, and the organic shape of the rock stands in for the landscape. And the colors, I should mention, there was a lot of debate, and I'm going to show you some iterations of my process, how I ended up choosing the colors. But the overall concept is the color of light reflected in the ocean from morning to evening. So this is a picture that I took on one of the shores of San Francisco. I can't recall now where, but I was often looking at the beauty of the landscape and wanted to create something that spoke to the serenity and the connection to nature within the city. And so to make the project, I started to mold rocks, but it did not work. I tried to sculpt them. So I realized at one point that I needed to actually use a rock. And so I think I spent many months and many travels trying to look for the right rock. And so these that I just came on across were just garden rocks, but they were lava, so they had these indentations. And so I was able to paint them so I could see them more clearly. So there they are, and I'm trying to decide on the scale and the height and so forth. And so what we did is once I had selected the right 20 rocks. I sent them to a 3D place and scanned them. I hope that this is interesting. I thought it would be cool for me to share some of my process here. And so these are some of my notes. So from this original rock to its kind of first scan, and then its process scan, and then by the time we decided how smooth we wanted it to be. And I wanted these rocks to be smooth because I really wanted them to be kind of like candy, or like really soft to the touch, or almost simultaneously futuristic, cartoonish. So there was many different like layers that I couldn't use the rock as the way that it would be, because I wanted it to be enjoyable to touch. And so once we kind of smoothed it out, we made sure that the rocks also made sense for ADA regulations and weren't poking out too far. And so, I think at some point, like I got rid of that top part of that, for example. So there was a kind of a post augmentation of the scanned rocks. But some people have worried that there's actually rocks trapped inside the paint. But I just wanted to be really clear that like that's not the case. So the rocks are 100% made out of stainless steel. And so a little bit more about the process. This is another one with the 3D file. And then here it is where, oh, that's kind of loud. Here it is with the 3D robotic arm carving the foam, which then will be used to make the cast. So once we've figured out the exact three-dimensional shape of each rock, this was the process. And then this is a video of the flat plate being cut, and around the form. So first the form is cast, and then it's welded onto the plate, and then the plate is cut out around it. So the process was really amazing. I learned so very much through the process, and I feel so thankful to have been able to go through it all. And here are some of the shapes and rocks after the process of being brought together, and there's the beautiful weld job. Amazing, the most clean job. I have to say, Casey Fabrications in New York made this work for me, and I could have not imagined any other place to work with. They were amazing. So now we think that, we're past the hurdle, but the color was such a big element in this work. I had originally proposed a much more muted color palette, but then once I spoke with the landscape architect and the site was built, we realized that there was a need for a little bit more of a splash. So we moved away from kind of a more serene color to bring some color that created more joy. But which colors was a very big question. I went through a lot of different steps and iterations. What I really wanted to do was to speak about the beauty of light and the way that it reflects off of the water. So for my concept, I used this idea of the sun rising and then sun setting, and then the deep blues in the center were for the noon hour sun, where the light is shining at 90 degrees down, and so the water looks blue. So that was it. I just thought I should show you this because this was some of the steps of the process. That the initial bottom step is what I had approved. The through the city, and then I realized that I needed to move some of the rocks because of the um, weight and the installation parameters over the concrete versus the flooring, and so forth. And also, I realized that I needed there to be multiple views that were multiple colors. Anyways, so this is some of the steps for how I got to the final color palette, which is what you see at the top.
This is
Uh,
all very fascinating. I'm so glad, and I know people have commented too of how amazing and interesting this is to see. It's rare to be able to know all the different steps that you went through in your process. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love talking about the process, and I feel so privileged to be an artist because I get a chance to do this amazing stuff, and you can see how happy I am. In this image, I wanted to include it, even though it's a little silly, because I was so excited to finally have the last set of colors. So there they are, getting packed to be shipped to the painter. Yeah, I feel very privileged. Oh, here's one more video. I guess I have another one here. This is the coat that goes on, it's the prime. So they use almost like a mid-tone prime so that for the darker colors. I mean, like, what a privilege to be an artist, to be able to think about these things and play and be able to hopefully bring some interest into sometimes a drab urban setting, right? So this is actually the same group from the two different sides. So again, the mirror side versus so this blue one is way at the back in the image on the right. You can kind of see it there. And there's my fabricator, Chris. Yeah, so I think when I was something like 20, I had this vision of making candy colored sculptures. And so it took like, about 20 years for me to finally be able to do it. But I've been dreaming about making this work for a very long time. So it's very exciting to have it shipped. But of course, this all happened during the kind of like peak of COVID. So believe it or not, I have not seen this work yet in person myself, and so it's very exciting for me. If anyone in San Francisco is watching and gets to go, please send me a message. I would love to hear what you think of it. I would love to see pictures that you might want to share with me of the work. So there it is, getting installed. I don't know why I included this, but this is like the specifics of exactly where every piece was and how they were positioned. And these green squares is where the tree beds were, so we wanted to make sure that we avoided them. And so there was also kind of the seam between the concrete and the stone, so we had to avoid that. So everything was very incredibly measured. And here I also had an amazing collaborator, Damas Amer, who has been working with me on projects for a couple of years now, and he stood in for me because I couldn't come due to COVID, and he oversaw the entire installation and made all the calls, and it was amazing. I just feel so privileged to be able to work with other people because, being an artist sometimes is very isolating. So here is the installer, Chris, a different Chris. We had two Chris's on the project, raising the pieces, and they were each wrapped so that when the paint wasn't, hurt, wasn't ruined when it was lifted. And so here's the installation again in its what I think glory, because I do really love it. Yeah. I think I have a couple more images, and that's gonna be my full presentation. This is my friend's daughter, Ramona. Oh, there's a
Yeah, I
Playing
had the privilege
provocateur.
of seeing this work. So, and I mean, anyone who's an SF can, um, and I highly recommend it. It is really fun, and to spend time and with the work that you've created, and it's really playful. Uh, it's really fun to get up close and far away, and I really love this work. So,
Thank you so much.
mhm.
Okay, I'm
And
gonna
the
stop sharing.
colors too are just, yeah, they're so great. And it's interesting, like you said, it's in a very recently developed area of San Francisco. And I really love how it brings that color to this area, because for many of us living in San Francisco for some time, or have visited, there are so many other aspects of San Francisco that are very colorful and bring that brightness. So I appreciate it. And also, I loved hearing you talk about where the colors are inspired from, or like the suns, the reflection on the ocean and the sunset and the sunrise. Because, like, especially, I mean, some people, all the folks that live in San Francisco know this, but right now there's been some time of fog, typical summer here. And it's a nice reminder that we have some of the most beautiful skies here and get to experience some of the most beautiful sunsets. And this is kind of a reminder of that. So I think days like this, it's better to go see this work too, because it's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure I just stop sharing my screen now though, right?
Yeah. And then feel free to kind of maybe go back to images as we talk about some of the
Sure.
work. Maybe we'll kind of ride this train on the rolling reflections, because I see some questions coming up from it, and then we'll go back to some of the other work you've talked about.
Okay.
So yes, Liz is asking, mentioned what an amazing project. Was it a big shift to work in such a sculptural way after working mostly in photography? Which I'll let you answer that, but I can see you kind of hinted at this, talking about your previous exhibition, and how there's a little bit of hints of sculpture already happening in your work.
Yeah. No, that's a really hi, Liz. Yeah, thanks for being here. Yeah, I totally agree. It does feel like a huge jump for me, but I have to say that I've been researching sculpture for at least 6 or 7 years prior to that. So I think it's just that I've been thinking about making sculpture for a very, very long time, and I finally had the opportunity to do it. But I have kind of made smaller, I would say, interventions. So even with my photographs, I didn't really speak about this, but a lot of the panels come off the wall. So I was really interested in the way that a space can be occupied in 3 dimensions. But yeah, slowly. I've been working, inching towards it slowly. In terms of photography, though, I do feel like these reflective mirror surfaces do stand in for the camera or the image for me. I do like using the mirrored surface, and I've done a number of different projects with it because I feel like it's a moment where viewers kind of triangulate and like finish the work for me. I think that it's a bit of a triad of like me, the sculptor, and the viewer. And so without the viewer seeing themselves within the context of the city, within the context of this landscape, urban landscape, that's what finishes the work. So, and for me, that's very much related to photography. And we can talk about that. We kind of chatted about this a little bit before.
Yeah.
Um, Shirin.
Yeah, I really like what you said there. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier too. Of there's not really there doesn't need to be a limitation on working with photography or as a photographer. There's different ways of working with the medium and bringing it in different aspects of it, and it doesn't just have to be a print. So I really like that, and I think what I took also from experiencing this work was how interactive it became, because at times you're the same height as the pieces, and you can kind of go up close and far away and see them as a body of work together, and also as individual pieces, especially the way they're laid out. So I appreciate that. I love that.
Yeah, and I think like my goal is to like somehow empower the individual people, the public, to see themselves and to, anyway, at some level, I know it's very minute, but to give voice in a way.
We talked about this a little bit before in other calls, but do you want to maybe talk about the importance of public art to you, and how it differentiates from work you've done in galleries?
Yes, for sure. I love making public art. I think it definitely feels like it's my new jam. But it really, I think that it kind of stemmed out of my first kind of big experience making public art in 2014. I was commissioned by um, the Art Commission of Washington, D.C., the Cultural Commission there. And in particular, I was asked by wonderful curator Justine Topfer, who used to be based in San Francisco, to exhibit there. And I had very little experience working with public art at that time. So what we decided to do was to transform this like vacant building and to plaster it with like images of my work. And the process was laborious, but so incredibly rewarding, because I had a chance to, while installing, which took about a week on the street, on the ground, speak to all the passerby. And I just realized that there is this threshold that exists within the gallery space, whether it's a museum, an artist-run center, or a commercial gallery. There's this threshold, realistically, of passing through the door and feeling invited and feeling welcome. And it's very different when you actually make work that's like on the street. So I just found that incredibly powerful, and wanted to have almost two avenues of my practice. One, which is my gallery work that might actually do a lot of research for, and a lot of kind of studying, but that research and study can actually also inform my public artwork that might be, I guess, more friendly. Which I think brings the concept of color actually into the equation as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate public work, and because it allows, I don't know, there is a sense of like when you enter a space, how you enter that space versus the outside, where you can kind of just there's a difference of like how you carry your body and who you are as well.
Yeah, and there's like more layers to my work too that don't need to always be kind of pointed to. But for example, with the rolling reflection piece, the heights of all the sculptures, they actually demonstrate the elevation, the cross-section elevation of San Francisco. So there are two peaks, like these like twin peaks within the height. And so the color is this like time scale of a day. And so for me, I was really interested, and have been for a long time, about how one can think about scales of kind of time and consciousness and all of that. So I hope that there is some nuances there to kind of play with as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think someone asked a really great question, but before going into the question, this work is permanent, right?
Yes.
It's not going to be doing
Hopefully, as long as no one damages it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's permanent. And we did all sorts of things where, like, for example, the sculptures, if you go, you'll notice they're about 3/4 raised from the ground, so that they're not like ever sitting in water, so they won't rust. So there's a lot of kind of precautions.
Yeah.
they can, for them to last, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. And for everyone else, I believe Christina put in to the chat the address. It's 1500 Mission Street. It's near the corner of South Van Ness and Mission, so you won't miss it from the
It's
color.
actually where the old Goodwill used to be.
That's right. Yeah, for folks who've been around, they know the old Goodwill on South Van Ness. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So a friend, Erin Wilder, is saying hello. Hello,
Hi.
and great to see you and learn more about your work. You described already how the more abstract works you presented are grounded in the political, although perhaps less apparently than in some of your other photo montages, because especially the work that you had at Camerawork, is pretty clear, the connection to politics apparently in some of the photo montages. They're wondering about how you feel about how viewers may experience your more abstract works as political, even though maybe they're not. Is that something you were concerned about, or is openness interpretation or something welcomed and you are excited about?
100% the latter. I definitely, hi, Erin. Thanks for being here. So yeah, I definitely want to have interpretation. I specifically try and make work that is open to interpretation. So in particular, not that, I mean, maybe not 100% like different interpretations, but I tried to make work that has multiple points of entry for an audience. So a child might approach it differently than an adult, for example. And from there, I think that everything that I make is political, no matter what, because my life is embedded in politics, and my brain is always thinking about ways to include, ways to bridge. I am forever interested in creating cultural kind of connections. And so I know this work is not particularly based in Islamic ornamentation or whatnot, but for me, this was, I think, a cultural connection to nature, and kind of really came out of like my research on climate crisis and how we can kind of focus and think about the land.
Which I think you touch on in a lot of your work. And I appreciate how this one, I appreciate that you, the work that, the projects that you work on are really related to the surrounding environment, especially the public work. I encourage everyone to check out Sanaz's other work on her website, because there are a lot of, of course, you've done so much, not just these projects in recent years. So I encourage everyone here to check out other projects, because there is more of that, of what you said presented, and not just this work, but other work that are public.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
So I kind of, we touched on a little bit of the going back to signal to noise, and the photo montages that you had. Someone during your presentation asked, and I think it's pretty clear that if Islamic traditional geometric patterns is an influence in your work, and if you want to talk a little bit about that. We've talked a little bit before of your reasoning behind using a lot of Islamic imagery in your work.
Yes.
And your experience using Islamic imagery, and what that means to you, and maybe share a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I always like to talk about my process because, it's one thing to read text, but it's another thing to, I feel like I'm an artist where a lot of what I do is very fluid and just kind of based on a lot of information that I glean and based on my own like personal lived experiences. So when I was doing the research for the work with the patterns, Islamic ornamentation, I at that time I knew that I wanted to use low resolution images that were circulating on the internet multiple times, and I knew that I needed it to also juxtapose them with images that don't get circulated, to kind of talk about what's being presented to us, right? What are we what are we asked to consume, and what are we kind of shielded from, or blocked from, right? So for me, it had to do with access and censorship. And so at the time, in order to talk about the multiple, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was just kind of using an Andy Warhol kind of strategy, where I would just take one image and multiply it next to each other. And so I was doing that, and it wasn't really great. So, and I actually happened to take a vacation or a trip to go to Iran, and I went with my Canadian American Greek French Canadian husband. And it was his first time to ever visit Iran. And so, of course, we got to the border, and he doesn't speak a word of Farsi, and he has to go on a separate line at the border patrol in the airport, because he's the international and I'm the one with the Iranian background. And so, what is he going to do? So anyways, he's there talking to, what looks like a very serious man. And, minutes later, I'm through, and they're asking me to come over. So I go gingerly over there, and the border agent tells me to come really close. And he's like, okay, so where are you taking him? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you have to take him to Shiraz, you have to take him to Isfahan, you have to make sure he gets to taste this, the kebab place you gotta go to this kebab place. And he's just giving me a list of all the things that I have to take Andrew to experience, because he was just so excited to have an international, and he wanted to show how beautiful and amazing Iran is. And of course, I did listen to him. And so we went to many different cities, and we saw some incredible architecture. We saw some amazing art. And when I came back, it was just crazy, I thought. I just sat down with the same files, and I started to make the Islamic ornamentation. And it just kind of poured out of me, because we traveled for about a month. And somehow it finally kind of clicked, and it was incredibly amazing. So it was a bit serendipitous, I would have to say, in terms of how I came to use it. But then I realized that there was a lot to it, because here I am taking these images produced by the Western world, circulated by the Western world, or let's say, yeah, you can call it anything. Maybe you shouldn't call it Western, but certain powers that be. But I was also overlaying it with Islamic ornamentation. And so I was kind of linking and kind of embedding the two cultures together. And I think there was just a lot to that helped, that lined up, and that it just made sense to do it this way. So I guess that's a version. And then I should also say that in Islamic ornamentation, this pattern, this kind of like in Western language we call it kaleidoscopic, right? This kaleidoscopic pattern that is infinite and continues and continues, stands for this concept of the hereafter, the world beyond this one. And so I wanted to use it as a non-secular way to think about the future, and to think about an alternative to the current reality that we're in. So really imagining this, because it allows, it's basically used in meditation, right? So when you're looking at this pattern, it allows you to kind of think about beyond the location that you're in. I'm not talking about it in terms of religious specifically context, but so I really wanted to think about how there could be a kind of a coming together, a future potential. So yeah.
I love that, because it does you've talked about it too, because your pairing of these contrasting
Mm.
images are just kind of doing that, right? It's bringing in this perspective that it's happened, for years now, and a lot of people, we talk about it more and more now of the importance and the effects of images getting circulated over and over again, and what that does to us as viewers, as people within society, when we're just only seeing a certain image over and over again. But when you're pairing it with a different one, you are allowing the viewer to kind of get this different perspective, to kind of step back and to, in a way, like with a more of a critical eye, I guess, looking at it. But I also what I really like about that work, and I think that could go on to say about your other work as well too, is when you first see it, at least for me, and I think it would be different for everyone, depending on your background and your experiences, it was this really nice feeling to see this tribute to Islamic art, and it took me to my experiences of Iran and what I know of that influence and that patterns, and so it was kind of nice. And when you go up close, you have, it's another layer. So I think that was really effective, but it could be different for everyone. And it's always interesting to me, I'm sure it is to you as well, of like, okay, how is everyone viewing this, and what's
Yeah.
their experience? And but yeah, it's recognized.
Yes, for sure, 100%. I think that basically it's a way of being seen, right?
Mhm.
It's a way of being seen outside of the dominant narrative.
Yeah,
You know, all
exactly.
of a sudden, I'm not just a terrorist. I can also be an artist.
Yeah.
I'm not a terrorist at all, but sometimes that's how I'm perceived,
Yeah.
singularly, right? And
Mhm.
so, what are the alternative ways of kind of defining um,
Yeah.
people? Yeah.
And it also goes back to, like the private and public spaces as well, of like, it's interesting. And I mean, I think like you mentioned this, your work can get political both in both spaces, both public and private.
Yeah.
But there is that there are different levels of security in different spaces as well. When you can
Yes.
be intimate with it, and there's different ways of behaving in certain spaces and other spaces that we can't control. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. Um, I also really I'm interested in the amount of research and that goes into your projects. It seems like you are continuously delayering more and more as
Mhm.
you get closer to developing your work. And it feels like it could never stop. So like, how do you continue? How do you continue to deconstruct something, and when do
Yeah.
you tell yourself to kind of like stop and call it finished,
Oh
or is
yeah, that's true. I think that I work a little bit like with a hypothesis.
mm-hmm.
And then I try to do enough research that I can substantiate what I want to kind of express.
Yeah.
And sometimes the research just takes me to a different tangent, and the original hypothesis is like just thrown out the door. So yeah, I think that's my process. I'm not like a super research heavy artist. I wouldn't say that of myself, but I do enjoy learning. So I think that's the thing. It's like the same excitement that I have for learning about, paint and metal and photography and its processes is the same as like just learning about a subject.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Well,
mean, like for example, with like my recent work with that deals with climate control, like I had to learn a lot of new things, just a lot. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I needed to do the research to be able to talk about glaciers melting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's Yeah, no, I can see the parallels of you feel your work is so playful and how you are also playing in your process.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And of course, I use artistic license like all the time.
Yeah, yeah, great. Do you want to talk a little bit more? You touched on it when you were talking about your exhibition Light Times, but like there's a lot of collaboration happening in some of your work, and there needs to happen because in order for your idea or your hypothesis, when you're saying that to move forward, you need to collaborate with others.
Yeah.
Um, when did that start, or how did you go about that?
I think that started from feeling really lonely as an artist working in my studio, or just in front of my computer. And I'm a people person. I do enjoy collaborating. Like I just enjoy having people around. And so, I mean, in reality, I think though I'm making work for a large audience. So if you have multiple perspectives and points of view in the process of making the work, then it could be more holistic. And so it's really about like finding a space for respect and reciprocity, and finding a way to just bring that to the table. And I think that just like working on your own is not that much fun. I don't think it's as rewarding.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really cool to see the endless possibilities of light times and kind of, I loved learning about how much you pushed forward your ideas and the connections to photography with the perfume and with the music
Yeah.
and everything. And yeah, it's hard to believe you didn't miss anything,
No, no, there's a lot of photography processes that I miss. I bet there's lots of people who can chime in here. Plus, I like skipped over the camera. I feel like I really need to do a project that has to do with the camera next. I don't know where I'm gonna start though. But that's the thing. I mean, other people have expertise, right? So it's impossible to have the expertise in everything yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like it's a definition of our humanity is to built on the knowledge of our, uh, past generations
Yeah.
and our ancestors.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that. Like, I can sometimes similar to like want I have this interest of like wanting to do so many different things and not just focus on one thing. So maybe that's where it's coming from for you as well, of just like
Yeah, that's
adapting to
true.
everything and wanting to learn and
Yeah,
um,
I
not
am very curious. I'm
yeah,
a curious person.
love that. Yeah, and I think it comes through, and it's so great, as we mentioned before, to see your process because I think that is a huge part of understanding your work as well. To kind of seeing where you come from, and how you drew these conclusions, and what the final work ends up being. I think it's really sweet to understand that further. Uh,
Yeah, thank you. And I think that like photography is really important in our society today, and artists and photographers have a lot of power.
mhm.
And so I think we experience, like photographers experience the image culture on a different level. And so to kind of help unpack visual language and how it's used is essential for everyone, like for the next generation.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with you, and it's very, very important. And
Yeah, I mean, places like SF Camerawork, like we have a similar place here in Toronto called Gallery 44. Like they exist for a reason, right?
yeah, I totally agree, and I really appreciate spaces like SF Camera Work for that reason too, of this getting this exposure to every different like to various different artists and how photography plays such an important role and from day to day life to from history, and so I um,
Yeah.
completely agree with you.
Hmm.
So maybe as we're wrapping up, I hope more people will chime in and ask questions. We're getting close to the end of our time. So I encourage you to put in comments or anything in the chat for us to talk about. But Sanaz, maybe let us know like what's on the horizon for you, and what kind of direction do you see yourself going now?
Sure. Sure. Well, maybe I can just I don't know if I look it looks like um Christina shared the links, but should I show like my final project that we were thinking of including
Oh yeah. You talk
here?
about all that melts?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I
Okay,
can.
let's see if I got this. Oh, I know I'm gonna get this wrong again because you know what it
Okay.
is. I have multiple screens and it's very confusing for me. Okay, I'm just gonna try to share my screen and see if it works. Are we working here? Is it working?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Okay, I got it. I figured it out. All right. So this is a project that I did in the city of Vancouver, and it was a temporary public art project, and basically, I did a lot of research based on climate crisis, and the shoreline levels rising and icebergs melting, and also the displacement of animals and plants because of the severe potential increase in temperatures. And so part of what we did is I worked in collaboration with a community organization called Highs for Humanity. And what they do is they work with local members to plant community gardens, but specifically plants that are indigenous to that location to help with pollinators. And so just learning a lot from them has been amazing. And so that's the reason I wanted to show a few images of this project is that's kind of where I think I'm headed next. I'm really interested in learning more about native plant species and their historical and uses. And so I'm trying to learn some of the names of the plants, and for example, Squamish, which is the one of the groups in Vancouver, and figuring out like ways to support that kind of knowledge sharing of indigenous ways of knowing with a larger audience that can shift this feeling and relationship to land and plants as resource. So I'm like really, it's hard even for me to shift that space of how do we experience materials and how we think of it as a more holistic. So that is kind of where I'm headed with this. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I highly encourage folks here to go and check out Sanaz's website to learn more about this work and so many others that she did not touch on. I think it goes without saying how impressive your practice is, and I'm so glad that you were able to join us and get to share with us your work and in such detail. And so very much appreciated. I'm going to hand it back to Christina and allow her to wrap it up for today.
Hey. I want to call attention to a comment that was put in the chat from Phil, which was, I think, summed up the presentation really nicely. And Sanaz just commented back too. He says, I really enjoy seeing the movement of your work among different disciplines and how you incorporate societal issues into beautiful presentations. It sums it up great. It was wonderful having you back here. I was just overjoyed looking at the install shots from Camerawork again and remembering all of the fun that went into installing that exhibition, and seeing the work that you are making now. Um, Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for also showing all the kind of details of the back end. I think that, as Shirin said, it's always wonderful to see the process and see the colors, see how you're collaborating with other artists in making the work, and then also the final product. So
Thank you, and thank you for your invitation, and thank you, Shireen, for the lovely conversation. So fruitful and rewarding for me.
yeah. So thank you everyone who tuned in tonight to listen to the conversation and for asking your questions and for putting in your comments. Really appreciate you being here. Before we wrap up, um, we just have some things coming up at Camerawork that I'm going to share with you. We have Forecast is our open call that we're taking submissions for now through July 23rd. So if you're interested in submitting, I would highly encourage you to check out our website. We're also going to be having a conversation on Thursday where you can find out a bit more about the submission process and ask any questions that you have for those of you who've been applying. We also have 2 critiques coming up. There's one critique next week with Sarah Christensen on Tuesday, and then there also is a critique in August with Rodrigo Valenzuela. And so I think there's one more spot for Rodrigo's critique. So if you're interested, please let me know. And always you can attend and see what other members are working on and ask questions about the project. So those are the upcoming events at Camerawork in July and in August. So thank you again so much, everyone, for tuning in. Appreciate you being here. And again, thank you, Sanaz, and thank you, Shirin, for the lovely conversation. It was really wonderful to have you with us this evening. So thank you. And good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.